And I think that my advice to Titans fans, impacted emotionally by the outcome of these games, would be to pick up another hobby for your Sunday.
Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live on a Tuesday, October the 22nd. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer, and here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke. And once again, I am joined by my lovely co-host, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of the Sobros Network, 1/3 of football and other F words, and co-writer over at stackingtheinbox.com. Stoney, another week, another Titans loss. This one a lot more embarrassing than the other ones, which I don't know. I wrote this week early on that in week 3, I said the Titans were seemingly at rock bottom. Well, the Titans found themselves a drill and continue to dig into that bottom rock there and keep finding ways to dig deeper into what is now basically a lost 2024 season. Stoney, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm going to be on my best behavior, JT. My wife told me I can't call anybody stupid today, so I'm going to do my best not to.
Hey, and that's what we're here for, Good advice from the wife, I would say, for sure. And
listen, I'm ready to talk draft. Can we start talking draft around these parts?
Okay. No, listen. Okay. If there's one thing that I carry on in the show from the former co-host, Easton Freeze, it's that my draft evaluation does not start and will not start until January, because there's no reason for me to start my draft evaluation now, because I have things to talk about. And even if it is the terrible Titans and how they've been playing, I'm still going to talk about that instead of something that is over 6 months away, in my opinion. But maybe that's just me. I know you are already on. Maybe you're like deep into your 2025 evaluation. I wouldn't be surprised if you're already starting to dip the toes into the 2026 prospects and looking. That's how far in you are, for sure. I mean, we can talk about it. I don't know how much I'm going to.
I have taken a peek at the 2026 class. That's all I'll say. I've got 30 full evals written already. I'm trying to piece together like my top 50 kind of prospects. I want to get the first layer on all of the first, second round caliber guys before I really move into the deep parts of the draft. But I'm 30 players deep. I'm ready to start digging into it, because I think this Titans team, I think they are what we thought they were last week.
I think
inevitability.
It pretty much is what it was in a game that last year. I feel like we talked about this Titans team kind of being the definition of insanity by way of just not having the personnel to ever win a game, and yet talking ourselves into believing that maybe they could this week. This year, it's the definition of insanity, but it's the same phrase, tale of two halves, over and over and over again, because that's really what it's been for this Titans team. But we're going to dive into it here on a Tuesday. And if you are joining us live over on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to the Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube pages, where you can join the conversation like Daniel and Eddie and Shrike over there in the comments. Daniel, pushing back against the haters of the intro music, the intro music haters here, saying headbanging in the car to the intro music on the way home. Hope he's just, headbanging along to the music and not physically banging his head into the car, as this in reaction to this Titans team. Eddie saying Braden and Paul can run from it, but this is your show, Stoney. Let's do some draft talk, and maybe we'll end the show with some draft talk just for you. Shrike saying there are no answers, just sadness.
That's where I am.
Eddie saying the answer is tequila, which is a great segue into another thing I might add. Sinkers Beverages, our wonderful and amazing sponsor here on the Hot Read Podcast, bringing this show free to you twice a week for the season here. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages and their sister location, Bluegrass Beverages. More on them later. All right. Stoney, I brought something up a little bit ago here, not too long ago, about the Titans continuing to be an insane team that keeps having these games of tales of two halves. And that's really what this game was, because if you want to stop watching this Titans game on Sunday at the half mark, you would think, oh, this is a pretty decent team. I mean, they are talking about shutting a sleepy Buffalo Bills team seemingly down for the entire first half, not allowing the Buffalo Bills to convert on a single third down in that first half. Obviously, they do get a score off a pretty decent drive towards the end of the half, but for the most part, this was a team that was taking advantage of what the Buffalo Bills were showing them. And that was not a lot, because this is a team that got a massive slow start in that game. But as we know, over the past, 2 or 3 weeks, we see the same thing where it's just simply is not enough for this team, because things start to fall off the rails here. And that has to do a lot with, I think, this notion of momentum with this Titans team. I don't know about you, but there's a lot of people who were telling me this weekend at the half, and specifically a certain point of this game that I think we'll get into here in a second, about a huge momentum shift where it was going the Titans' way, and then all of a sudden it was the Bills for the rest of the game, and the Titans looked lifeless. And a lot of people were telling me momentum does not exist. This is not a thing. That is crazy talk to me, because I think momentum absolutely exists in the realm of sports, and specifically in the game of football. And it's something that definitely switched to the side of the Buffalo Bills at a specific point. And I think it comes in the beginning of the second half when Brian Callahan goes for that fourth down call. And I think a lot of people thought that it was a pretty crazy call this week. But when you look at the analytics and kind of see where that kind of turning point was for the Buffalo Bills, it wasn't really that crazy of an idea for Brian Callahan to go for it there. This comes from Ben Baldwin's fourth down decision bot. And when it looked at that exact play where the Titans were up 3 at 4th and 2, 56 yards from the opponent's end zone, you look at the decision-making here, and it says the win percentage when you go for it was at 40%, and when you punt, it goes down to 37%. That success rate for them was 52%. And obviously, if they would fail, their win percentage goes down to 30. But if they succeed, that increases even better to almost a 50% chance to win the game there. And so I kind of got a lot of backlash for thinking that it was not a bad decision for the Titans to go for it there, especially considering how well they had played at the beginning of this game. Tennessee stopping Buffalo at every single opportunity for them to get off the field. They were doing that very well. If you get this fourth down call to work, you're able to kind of prolong this drive and maybe stifle this Buffalo team even more and let Josh Allen sit on the bench, unable to kind of come out of half and kind of flip the script. But if you do not make it, there's still reason to believe that your defense can keep up this momentum that they've been forcing onto Josh Allen the entire game. Obviously, it backfires in the face of Brian Callahan, and he's getting a lot of backlash because it did not work. But I think when you look at it, if they were able to get that fourth down call, I think you would have seen the Titans be able to keep the pressure on this Buffalo Bills team.
Yeah, and I think Brian Callahan talking about the decision to go for it, I think he said the reasoning behind the decision made sense. You go for it. The analytics models suggest that you go for it. He said that Buffalo came out in a nickel defense. So you're thinking, wow, if this thing's blocked up, it's a lighter box, we can pick up this short yardage first down running the ball. And what happens is something that I'm going to sound like a broken record in today's episode: player execution. Peter Skoronski's blown up on the play. They shoot the gap. They stop the run. They don't convert. And from there, I think you do see like an issue with this team. The later into the game it gets and the more the opponent tends to pile on, there's just not a lot of like leadership on the field, stepping up, kind of getting guys rattled, getting guys in the moment. And it just kind of feels like this is a listless football team. So I don't have necessarily an issue with Brian Callahan electing to go for it. I think he explained in great detail why they called the play that they called, because that's the next layer of this, was people coming out and saying, well, I don't mind him going for it, but to call the same play two plays in a row and get blocked is just, that's crazy. That's the issue I have. But they were blocked differently, the third and short and then the fourth and short. And again, you come back to, if Peter Skoronski makes a block, they probably convert that first down. And it's we're not even talking about this at all. The issue I have with the fourth down decisions to go for it earlier in the game, they opt to kick a field goal instead of going for it. And in that situation, I'm thinking, man, you're a 1-4 football team. You've been aggressive all season long. You're down in the red zone, defense playing well. Why not just go for it and try to just extend the drive at the very least, convert the first down, get in the end zone, go up 7-0 instead of 3-0, and set a more pressing tone for this game. That's actually what I questioned more from Brian Callahan when we're talking about the fourth down decisions. But I think that he's absolutely right to go for it in that situation. You laid out a great argument for it, JT. It just comes down to player execution, which is just such a problem on this team right now, and something that we've talked about for weeks, and I just don't see it getting much better.
Yeah, and I think Shrike also agrees there. I mean, he does have a point when you bring up analytics. Be damned, sometimes you have to be just a football coach.
I think that's fair.
He says if you aren't willing to go for it on 4th and 3 from the 7, you shouldn't be going on your own 40 when your defense is dominant. And I think that, once again, comes back to that point of momentum and execution, where you see once the Buffalo Bills are able to get onto the field here in that second half, it almost feels like the Titans just are unable to execute for the rest of that game. I mean, it was a night and day look from this Titans defense, specifically in terms of execution. It came down to a point where the two guys who were able to stretch the field and make big time plays, and Keon Coleman and the new addition of Amari Cooper, really came to bite them in the butt there towards the end of that game. I mean, even though you are kind of throwing guys out there like a 5th round rookie in Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who I thought held his own for a lot of the game, but, did show some of those rookie tendencies and fell back down to earth a little bit. When you have to run Darrell Baker and Trey Avery on the outside as well, how long can you actually kind of survive in that atmosphere and in that environment? And I think that is something that continued just to run out for them, much like it has in a lot of these games this year.
Yeah, listen, JT, I don't want to go as far as to suggest, just to make my opinion on the matter clear, so that I got to be honest with our viewers. I'm not a Keon Coleman guy at all.
Me neither.
The big Keon Coleman play was Jarvis Brownlee. Well, I don't want to accuse Jarvis Brownlee. I don't know who, but somebody was mixed up on the coverage there, because you had two players in the same zone on the same man, and nobody on Keon Coleman, a bust in coverage, and he's wide open for the play. So the issue is when you get into those spots as a defense where you're making guys like Keon Coleman
look good, look very
like
good. I mean,
giving
him his best game to date. I mean, you look at what he's done over his first how many games? 5 games this season. I mean, he had no game before coming into Sunday with more than 51 yards on the season, and then explodes for 4 receptions on 7 targets for 125 yards and a per catch of 31.3. I mean, yeah, it's just like you said, miscommunication, and when you get down to it, executing when you're expecting a guy like Darrell Baker and Trey Avery and all these guys to go out there and try to hold their own for 60 minutes, you're probably not going to get the results that you want.
Well, and it's a situation, something we've said before on this show as well, where like 4 out of 5 things can go right, but that 5th thing is just an absolute catastrophe. It feels like that in the second half of Titans games, and they're just not deep enough. They're not good enough to overcome that when those things happen. It's constant pressure on the quarterback, receivers dropping balls, busts in coverage, that sort of thing. That maybe when you're dealing with one of these issues at a time, you can compensate it in other facets of the game. But when it's all happening at the same time, the talent's not there to overcome it. You still have a rookie head coach that's trying to figure this thing out. It's the ingredients are not there for this team to kind of rise from the ashes, so to speak. And I hate to be all doom and gloom about this team, but you just have to have a realistic state of mind when you're looking at this roster right now. I will also mention, before I forget, JT, I don't have Easton's tweet handy, but he passed along something to us in the group chat where Buffalo switched to primarily zone defense from the first half to primarily man defense in the second half. And I think that completely stifled the Titans offense. I think it's one of the contributing factors to it, because you play the zone because you force the quarterback to kind of go through his reads and figure out what the defense is doing, who's covering where, find the open man. Probably a really good game plan against a Will Levis, who we've seen struggle with that likes to cling to his first read and isn't really going to worry about finding the open man. You can confuse a quarterback really easily playing that way. But Mason Rudolph, that's one thing that I think he was better at, was kind of going through the progressions from an operational standpoint. The offense was on time and a little more rhythm. He even got the unit up to clock, to spike the ball. Like, efficient operation of the offense was Mason Rudolph's thing. And I don't know if this was a situation where Buffalo came off of it and said, hey, Rudolph's not the guy to kind of confuse with this, because he's seen a lot of these looks with his experience in the NFL. Let's go to man. But it made a lot of sense when I watched the All-22 tape back and I saw the second half. Mason Rudolph overthrows, sailing balls, kind of off placement, because Buffalo was forcing a lot tighter windows in man coverage. So a lot of things just compounding on top of the Titans in the second half of this game. Yeah,
I definitely agree. And I think that's a conversation we can get into specifically about the quarterback play here in a second. But I think you do bring up an interesting point, that is being realistic about what this season now is at 1-5 and most likely 1-6. Not to get too ahead of myself, but the Titans do have a road trip to the Detroit Lions this upcoming week, where even if they will be without Jamison Williams, I don't know how much that really impacts the whole everything in the grand scheme of things. But it's important to be realistic about what this team is this season. And I think really, if you're going to watch the Titans going forward for the last 11 games that they do have to play, I think the big point is that there are some questions that I think we can answer in this season still. And these are the things that I think you should really be watching. And the first one, I think, is the development of 4 out of 5 spots on the offensive line, which I think are continuing to more or less trend in the right direction. I do think that it is still a group that is not where it needs to be, but I think they're trending in a direction to where you can see towards the end of the season, when maybe we get to week, I would say 13 or 14, you could see this kind of 4/5 of the line really round out into a group that you can feel good about going into next season with. However, I do think that the right tackle spot is something that if there's a question about it, it's not going to get answered this year, and that's for sure. And I think it starts with the Titans themselves not really caring or wanting to answer it. And that starts with the decision this past weekend to have Leroy Watson inactive, start Jalen Duncan, and have Nicholas Petit-Frere be the backup. And I think this was one of the most surprising and confusing things still, even after we got the answer that it was simply Jalen Duncan's turn to give it a shot. The fact that whether it's a money thing or something with how player elevation and whatnot in being inactive works, having maybe given Jalen Duncan the start, but still having NPF be the backup this past week and not having Leroy Watson there at all continues to boggle my mind, because when you look at it, Jalen Duncan ends up only being able to play a series and a half or so before it is the Nicholas Petit-Frere show. And I believe I put out a clip earlier this week that from that game that kind of confirmed our prior notions that Nicholas Petit-Frere still just simply does not have it. He lacks anchor. He lacks power. He is getting absolutely manhandled and bullied out there on seemingly every rep. And even if it was a stopgap, it's not anything better than what I think Leroy Watson could have had. And so I think my biggest question on that one, and that I posed to you, Stoney, is that Leroy Watson is a guy that Bill Callahan, Brian Callahan, this entire staff has kind of touted over the past couple of weeks that he may be the most versatile offensive lineman we have in our room. And to not have him active on Sunday when you are maybe not preparing for the worst case scenario, but when the worst case scenario hits, not having him active feels like it is an almost unacceptable decision in terms of coaching and player personnel.
Yeah. And I've been a huge defender of Brian Callahan, especially this week, ticking people off, I guess, by saying he doesn't sound like he's in over his head. But this is one thing that I can't really come to terms with, because I watch Leroy Watson. You can go to stackingtheinbox.com. There's a 20-minute film study where I break down his game against the Colts and how it was pretty easily the most stable the right tackle position has looked all season long. It's the first time since 2021 the offensive line didn't allow a sack in that game. I thought his footwork was better. I thought he added an element of power that Nicholas Petit-Frere didn't necessarily play with, and I think he added an element of feel, just the natural understanding of playing the position that Jalen Duncan hasn't quite developed yet. And I thought he was not just okay, but I thought he was good enough to have earned the starting job, at least for the foreseeable future, until he proves that he doesn't deserve it. That was my evaluation of the guy. And the way they've treated Leroy Watson has me looking in the mirror like, holy shit, Stoney, what did you miss about this guy? Because it just seems like such an egregious mistake to not even have him dressed and at the ready in case the Jalen Duncan experience goes wrong, which, listen, I'm a longtime Jalen Duncan defender as well. The Jalen Duncan experience at this point in his career is probably going to go wrong. You should have a backup plan for that. And their backup plan was NPF, who we've seen time and time again just get put on skates. I mean, just literally guys just run down the middle of him, drive him back into the quarterback. And it's really unacceptable right tackle play. And instead of just kind of sticking with the hot hand, they made this decision and it bit them in the ass yet again. And I don't know much about Isaiah Prince, who they've signed to the practice squad, apparently, if he's going to get a shot. Brian Callahan would apparently just as soon come wipe my ass in my own house for me than start John Ojukwu and give him a shot at the right tackle spot. So I don't know. I think that it's incredibly fair to criticize and question what the plan is at right tackle, because it's not working. And then when you finally do get something that at least allows the offense to function without shitting the bed, you move away from it. I don't get it, JT. It's one thing I can't understand.
The only reasonable explanation and maybe possible explanation that I can come up from with the information we have is that when Leroy Watson did play, I think penalties were a problem, and is something that this team, it doesn't take lightly, especially when you look at Leroy Watson's performance. A couple false starts, a holding penalty in that game against the Indianapolis Colts may have did him in. Maybe it was something in practice that we're just not privy to. It's something that I think if we get the chance to ask Bill Callahan this week, it's something that will be at the forefront of my mind, and a question I will definitely be wanting to ask him this week about the decision making in that area. But when you talk about what the answer is for this right tackle situation, I'll give you one answer that it certainly isn't, and that is looking at the rest of this line and trying to move pieces around. And this was a question that a whole heck of a lot of people wanted the Titans to possibly do this week, in terms of maybe putting Dylan Radins out to right tackle and putting Daniel Brunskill back into right guard, a position that both of these guys have played in the past. Whether or not they've played it well is still up for debate. And I think is not the total story there. But when asked about it this week, at right tackle, looking for something better than what we've had so far out of the mix, Callahan said, no thought of Radens right now playing well would be a disservice to him. And I think that is the right decision by this coaching staff right now, to not mess up the flow of what guys like J.C. Latham, Peter Skoronski, Lloyd Cushenberry, and Dylan Radens are. For the most part, they've played, at least competent level offensive line play throughout the first 5 games or 6 games of the season here. And so when you look at making a move like that, I just don't think that's feasible.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and I'm glad that Brian Callahan said it. It would be a disservice to Dylan Radens. We talk about a guy that's kind of been a journeyman offensive lineman on this one team, right? Not moving around to several teams, but moving around to several positions. He's played some left tackle. He's played some left guard, some right tackle. He's been all over the place. Might want to line him up at quarterback too while we're at it and see if he can do any better. But I do think it would be a disservice to Dylan Radens. One of the quiet storylines for this team that we haven't really talked a whole lot about this season, but the development of Dylan Radens at right guard has been phenomenal. He has become one of their more consistent offensive linemen. And I think if he continues on this trajectory, we might start having the conversation about Dylan Radens potentially being the franchise guy at right guard. Like he's played that well. And to take that away from him when he's finally settled into a spot on this offensive line, he's playing well. The way they pull the guards, like they need the athletic guys that understand the assignment right there. And Radens has really developed and blossomed into that role. So I don't want to change that up. Right now, you've got 4 out of the 5 positions that look pretty well locked down, at least for the foreseeable future. And they're looking pretty good from left tackle to right guard. It's just that right tackle has been so disastrously bad at this point. I'm okay with putting Daniel Brunskill out at right tackle. I've been joking about him being like the team's second best offensive lineman all season, all year long anyway. When they put him out there, they line him up at tight end. I mean, shit, give him some run at right tackle and see what he can do. It's got to be better than what they have right now.
Well, I mean, that is one option, but it certainly doesn't seem like the Titans may agree with that, because they were actively looking outside of the organization today to find answers at the right tackle. First, starting earlier today, Aaron Wilson reported that the Titans were working out offensive linemen. I still can't. I still don't know exactly how to pronounce his name. Yadni Kajeste, I think is how you say it.
I've been calling that man Rodney ever since he was drafted, so I ain't the one to ask.
Yadni Kajeste or Kajust,
I think.
Either one of those. But it looks like they went in a different direction when the Titans signed tackle Isaiah Prince to the practice squad. Prince was a 2019 6th-round pick for the Miami Dolphins. He has 6 career starts for them coming in the postseason, and he's played for Miami, Cincinnati, and most recently Atlanta in 2023. And when I saw that he had 4 postseason or playoff starts in his career, I went back and remembered that, oh yeah, he was the Cincinnati Bengals starting right tackle for their playoff run when La'el Collins got hurt. And so I went back and looked at his numbers when he was the starting right tackle for them during that season, and oh boy, I don't know if this is a Callahan connection, but when you look at the numbers, they're not very good, and I won't go through all of them here, but I do want to point a couple of certain numbers here, and this is from PFF, so we'll go through some of their grades, and I know that this isn't everything, but they are still something. When you look at what he was able to do in the playoffs, when you look at his offensive grades, his run blocking, and his pass blocking, Isaiah Prince only has 1 grade above 80, and it came, of course, against the Tennessee Titans in that game where he put up a 81.6 pass blocking grade performance, the best out of any And then you go and you look. Let's look at some of the not so good ones. We'll go. Actually, let's just go through the pass blocking grade, shall we? So in their wild card round against the Las Vegas Raiders, he put up a 31.7 pass blocking grade in 62 offensive snaps. Against the Titans, he comes back and bounces back, of course, 81.6 pass blocking grade. Against the Kansas City Chiefs in 69 offensive snaps, he has a 50.5 pass blocking grade, and then in this is the cherry on top, I think, but in 61 offensive snap against the Los Angeles Rams, Isaiah Prince puts up a 2.4 pass blocking grade.
That's a typo, right? That's got to be a typo.
I don't know. Is that good? Is it like golf? The lower the score, the better? I don't know. But
he got that 2.4 for having a pulse.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what his stats were in that game against the Rams in the Super Bowl here, 1 quarterback hit, 6 quarterback hurries, and 7 pressures allowed in the Super Bowl. Maybe Isaiah Prince is the main reason why the Cincinnati Bengals did not win that game when you think about it. And now he comes to the Titans practice squad and is supposedly the next guy to get a chance to prove that he is the 2024 Tennessee Titans answer at right tackle. After I put those numbers out there, Stoney, how do you feel about the acquisition of Isaiah Prince?
I'm kind of with TJ in the chat. We got to change the subject because I'm about to vomit right on my microphone. I'm gonna be sick. I mean, it just I don't. I sit here and I preach. There's no answers right now. They need to get to another player acquisition cycle as quickly as they can. They're obviously handling right tackle by just throwing shit against the wall to see what sticks. But at the same time, like. I wouldn't be so frustrated if Leroy Watson didn't play the way that he did against the Colts last week. Like, why not just stick it out? Because you've at least got a little bit of consistency there. I don't get it, JT.
Yeah, well, you know, and before you start vomiting all over your microphone, we'll move on here. But before we do that, let's get to some of the comments here in the comment section. And friendly reminder, if you want to join the conversation, if you're watching over on Twitter or Facebook, head on over to the Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube channel where you can join the chat here. Eddie starting us off and saying, need Vandy to win Saturday, so I'm too hungover to even wake up and watch Titans. I think that's a fair strategy. Shrike believing that the Vandy could beat, I want to say is what he means, the fourth quarter Titans. I don't know. Maybe that is up for debate, but certainly there is a case there. John Kemper and Kyle in the comments here saying former Titans are having a year this season. And Kyle saying at least Mariota looked good on Sunday, which I think is a great reminder to only worry about what you can control. And at the same time, you really can't control the Titan season. So why worry about Marcus Mariota and what Derrick Henry's doing? I mean,
yeah, no, and
there's no point in crying over that, in my opinion. Kenneth saying we need those draft picks at the trade deadline so badly. Quarterback, pass rusher, right tackle, receiver will quickly be a need soon. I think we'll get into some more trade
Agreed.
talks earlier or later on in the show here. John Kemper brings up a kind of disagreeing with you, Stoney, which I might give you the floor here. When he says Callahan is so in over his head, it sucks to see when we had such a veteran presence at head coach. And then another comment that I think we can kind of fill in here. Kyle also saying Callahan will get fired probably middle of next season, which I think is an absolutely ridiculous take.
No, JT, I've been dealing with this for the last 24 hours because I put out a tweet saying I don't understand how anybody can listen to Brian Callahan talk about what's wrong with this team, transparently, clearly explain his decision-making process in a way that makes sense. Like I was talking about with the decision to go for it on fourth down there, where you're going up against the nickel defense, lighter box, you think you can run the ball, pick up the first down. I don't understand how people can look at that. And he's telling you point blank, we've got a problem at right tackle. We're just trying guys out there and think that he's in over his head, because it, to me, sounds like a guy that knows exactly what's wrong with this team. I think it sounds like a guy that knows what's wrong with this team probably can't be fixed until they can get to another player acquisition cycle. But it's a guy that if you watch the tape, you can see the scheme working. The offense is getting guys open, and pass protection's not holding up. Calvin Ridley's not catching the ball. Mason Rudolph's throwing 5 yards behind the target, that sort of deal. There are little things that when he says we're close, you can watch the tape. And I know as frustrating and as maddening as it is for Titans fans to hear that in a press conference when your team is 1-5, you can see it on the tape. We are close. And I take him at his word for that. I don't believe him to be in over his head at all. I think it's just a matter of surviving this season. And I think that my advice to Titans fans that are impacted emotionally by the outcome of these games would be to pick up another hobby for your Sundays. Like go learn how to garden, go to the flea market, do some shopping, go to a coffee shop and read a book on your Sunday, because it's not going to get better until they can get to another player acquisition cycle. That's where I'm at right now. I don't think this is on Brian Callahan. I don't. I think this is on 3 straight shitty draft classes with no players that can step up into a satisfactory role. I mean, they've had to start from scratch. Look at all the new starters on this defense. Look at the new starters they have in key positions on offense. I think the strategy for this regime was let's just acquire talent. Like you need everything. Let's just get talent and we'll let the leaders emerge. You need leaders to start stepping up and giving this team a spark, but this is still something that's on the players to execute. So I don't know. I'm kind of out on the idea that Callahan's in over his head. I'm out on the people that are calling for his job. I think he's doing the best that he absolutely can. I even was critical on Sunday after the game and said, hey, you got to figure out a way to get the tight ends involved, use more 12 personnel, because that's what your team's built to do. But then once I watched the tape, I realized he's trying this stuff. He's doing it, and it's not getting executed properly. There were plays, JT, that they ran with all 3 of the tight ends on the field, with Nick Westbrook-Akine on the other side of the formation, their run-blocking wide receiver. Like they're doing the best that they can, and things just aren't being executed. And people are going to come at me and they're going to say, well, that's on the head coach that they're not executing. You can, what's the phrase? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. That's where they're at right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation to why things just have not worked so far. And I think it's a good segue into a couple clips here, which it kind of speaks to what you've just said there in terms of this Titans team taking a while for them to click. And I think it starts with Brian Callahan kind of assessing where he's been over the past couple of years in his career and where his Titans are now, where things just aren't working right now, and that it takes time for these things to develop and finally click. And so here's what Brian Callahan had to say about starting slow.
Earlier, when I was talking through, you go through these types of seasons and starts of seasons, and year one. I mean, every year one I've been a part of has been hard. Year one in Cincinnati was hard. Year one in Oakland with John Gruden was hard. I was in year 2 with year 1 with John Fox. That was hard. Like year 1 is hard. There's a lot of things that you're trying to work through. There's a lot of things you're trying to get on the same page. You're trying to build your program the way you want it. And there's always going to be difficulty. And having gone through those experiences gives me the hope that 1, I can handle it, and 2, I've seen it before, so I have at least some roadmap to what that might look like and how to get out of it. But there's challenges that come in the start of every program, and we've not done a good enough job of handling some of those all the way around, and we have to find a way to do those better. I struggle to compare years and teams, certainly, but there's some similarities to the two for sure.
And I think that's a perfectly realistic answer about where the Titans are right now. You kind of go back to what we were talking about in May. I mean, I don't, obviously the free agent acquisitions were a nice bump to think that this team could be frisky enough to make a playoff push or whatnot. But I think we've seen what we kind of thought this season would be, which was a building block into being a competitive team for 2025 and beyond. And it's something that I think Brian Callahan states there just blankly and plain for everyone to see and hear. That is, this is a team where it's in a transition phase and not all the pieces are going to be able to fix. The same pieces that we talk about being a problem every single week for this team are the ones we thought were going to be the problem before the season, with just no possibility of fixing them because there were more immediate needs. You fix the left tackle position. You bring in some wide receiver help. You bring in a new defensive fresh idea with Denard Wilson and some of the personnel you have back there. But you still have a lot of holes, one being maybe the most important position in quarterback and what Will Levis is. That is not fixed itself this year. You don't have an answer at right tackle, which has been probably the biggest reason why things in the past game have not been able to work, because simply they don't have enough time. You talk about some defensive inefficiencies in the edge rusher room, in the linebacking room. You have some bright spots in the cornerback room if they can simply stay healthy, which they haven't been able to. And we talked about before the season, if one or two of your top corners go down, they didn't have a lot of depth. And so I think that when you look at this team and you're trying to be angry about things not working, you kind of have to take a step back and realize this is what it was going to be all along. And I understand it was nice to think about this team maybe getting out in front of the curve here, which is the development curve, a little early and competing. But when you take a step back and you look at everything that they did this offseason, I think it's a pretty reasonable spot for them to be in. And I think that, the answer to a lot of the other questions for the rest of this year about what this team can be in 2025 rides on Will Levis. And going back to the point that I still think Mason Rudolph showed little to nothing in his start against the Buffalo Bills. I thought when the offense worked, it was a lot of more to do with the scheme and Brian Callahan attacking a lot of what the Bills were giving them, using a lot of the underneath stuff to the tight ends to let them make plays in space. There wasn't a lot of verticality or threat of throwing down the field, which is why I think the Buffalo Bills allowed Mason Rudolph to get a lot of those short throws off, because they knew there was not a lot of plans in the game plan for the Titans to really throw it down the field. You look at what Mason Rudolph did on Sunday, 5.7 yards per attempt at the end of the day, which was clearly inflated by him trying to make those deep ball plays work. A lot of them were just completely inaccurate passes whatsoever. But when you look at the beginning of the game in that first half, Mason Rudolph has a 2.7 yards per attempt, which is not something that is conducive to success for a quarterback, and is certainly not the answer. And so Brian Callahan was asked, with Will Levis and this whole injury, we're going to run out of time here, but we can save this for another day, about the whole injury conspiracy, which I think is absolutely ridiculous and stupid. And there's court jesters out on the radio talking about this being a whole, lying to every there are different answers for a different kind of person, and we're lying about everything. We got to put our tinfoil hats on, and we got to say that Will Levis actually isn't injured. But when you look at what this season can be for 2025 and beyond, the really only other spot that you can think to fix or have a chance of fixing this year is the quarterback spot. And I think that's something that Brian Callahan recognizes when Will Levis comes back healthy. And here's what he had to say and Mason Rudolph.
About what we were hoping to get out of the season was a really solid and concrete evaluation of Will as a starting quarterback. The injury process, we haven't played well enough anywhere around him. He certainly hasn't played up to what I think he's capable of playing. And so we're not in a great spot record-wise. And the injury doesn't help. And hopefully that the minute he's back healthy, the intent is for him to continue to play. And hopefully that's sooner rather than later, because I'd like to continue to have him playing football. But I'm not going to let him go out there if he's not where he needs to be to go perform. And so, again, hopefully in maybe this week, maybe next week, but sooner than later, he'll be back playing.
And so I think the really thing that you can look for is to hope, if you're going to not take Stoney's advice and maybe pick up golf on the weekends while you still have some time, or go pick up a book, or even indulge in some of Stoney's recommendations for Yankee candles and start building your collection of your own, or doing anything like that, is that you want to maybe find hope in that Will Levis can find some semblance of himself from last year and continue to develop and see if that is a realistic possibility. Now, that may just sound like a horror movie for some to see Will Levis start to play good towards the end of the year, when they really want a Cam Ward or a Carson Beck or a Shadur Sanders or something like that. And now you're in a hole, and that's another whole spin that we could get into there. But I think that's really the only place on this team that you can look at and say, maybe there is an answer here that we can find out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I feel like that is pretty plainly stated from Brian Callahan, that the goal is to get the evaluation on the quarterback. I mean, me personally, I've kind of shut the book on Will Levis. It would take a massive turnaround that would undo, at this point, years of similar mistakes being made on tape to get to that point. But I don't know. There's a lot recirculating this week, from quotes from Chad Brinker on the OTP, and quotes from different officials. The Brian Callahan press conference quote. The writing was there all along on the wall that this was going to be a process that I don't think they in the building were necessarily expecting to be a real Super Bowl contender in 2024, so to speak. I think for me, where things got turned around and the expectations were inflated was when I did see the team start making moves like acquiring L'Jarius Sneed, acquiring Calvin Ridley, and thinking, oh, wow, no, maybe they are pushing their chips to the middle of the table, and they think Will's going to be good, and then we're going to have this dark horse 2024 season. And it wasn't the case. And now we're kind of seeing the reality for what it is. And I think Will Levis is who he has been all along. And it's just a mistake-prone quarterback that just doesn't seem to have it sorted from the neck up. And for better or for worse, you ride it out for the season to see if he can eventually get things to start clicking. Maybe it buys you another year on the evaluation. Maybe you don't have to dip your toes into this quarterback class in the draft, and you can wait and all that stuff. That's the best case scenario. Well, depending on who you ask, it might not be your best case scenario. And the worst case scenario is that you bottom out, but your offensive linemen, who are probably going to be glued together for the foreseeable future, they get more experience. They grow into these blocking schemes. You get your wide receivers acclimated to the offense, you fine-tune the defense, and then you just continue to stockpile talent and add pieces. So I know it's not going to be a popular thing to say, but I think Will Levis is probably the move for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think so too. And you know what? If that upsets you, I have the perfect place for all Titans fans to go. That is Sinkers Beverages, the sponsor of this podcast. They have been serving the East Nashville community for over 40 years. They are now a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, have an absolutely incredible selection of both beers, wines, and spirits for you to peruse and enjoy. And if you're looking for something a little extra, you got to join their in crowd over there for special allocations, special benefits, special tastings that are private and you only know about when you do join their in crowd promotion and email list over there. If you can't, they have you covered. Just simply search Sinkers on Uber Eats and they deliver the booze to you. They drive so you can drink. Also have to give a shout out to Bluegrass Beverages, their sister store out in Hendersonville, who have been serving that community for over 50 years. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring the show. All right, Stoney, with our last 6 minutes and change, I think we'll give the people what they want, and that is draft talk, talking trades, trade deadline things and whatnot, because I think Kenneth will go back to his point here where he says the Titans need the draft picks. at the trade deadline so badly. Quarterback, pass rusher, tight end, right tackle, receiver will quickly be a need soon too. And I think someone here in the comments, Shrike, saying, why is Cam Ward and Carson Beck the first quarterback? Thoughts? Well, that's mostly because outside of maybe Shedeur, I think every quarterback in this class is straight dog. I don't think any of them are very good, nor would they be an answer for the Titans in 2025. But that's what I think here. Stoney, first of all, talking about the trade deadline, it certainly seems like we're kind of going towards the direction that there will be some pieces moving off of this team. And so the ones I would throw out to you that would be the biggest possible pieces. First of all, DeAndre Hopkins is probably the biggest one there. I would also probably throw out Quandre Diggs as a guy who they could potentially move. And then you get into some more that I think are maybe not as relevant, but I could still see happening. One, Harold Landry definitely could be a guy I could see on the move if someone wanted to take on that contract and help a team. You look at Jeffrey Simmons as another guy that could potentially be on the move. Out of those guys there, Stoney, who do you think would end up getting moved, and how much could you realistically see them get back?
Man, it's tough because I think Jeffrey Simmons is probably the most attractive of the bunch, but he's dealing with an injury right now. I don't think his play has necessarily been that consistent the last couple of years. So I do kind of wonder what has happened to his stock. I think he's probably the one that you could get the most for. And I've seen some people optimistically speculate could probably get a second for him, which would be pretty awesome. I'm at the point now where I am fire sale everybody, whatever you can get for anybody, get the draft picks, because I think that's how you're going to rebuild this team. Harold Landry, I think, is another guy that you could get a mid-round pick for. I'm really surprised that, the phone hasn't picked up. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that because we don't know who's calling and who isn't, but like, Detroit loses Aiden Hutchinson. They could use a pass rusher. I know their models not necessarily give up all these picks to acquire free agents at the trade deadline, but I would expect Harold Landry to have some interest from a contender that feels like they need some depth in the pass rush stable. And then the obvious DeAndre Hopkins, which I think at this point in his career, I don't know. I think you're awfully optimistic if you think you can get a third for DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think that's going to be the case. But Quandre Diggs, you mentioned. I've seen some people mention Amani Hooker as well. But it's tough because he's the one guy out of all these that I'm like, he's really playing well for this team. I don't think enough people are talking about Amani Hooker. So, I mean, there are some pieces that I think at this point, when you look at where the season's at and what this team needs to get better, it's more players. So do what you can to acquire the capital to go get more players. And I feel like the window is kind of closing on some of these guys anyway.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you for a lot of them. The biggest ones would be Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry, I think, are the hardest to move. But when you talk about pieces like DeAndre Hopkins or Quandre Diggs, you're probably not getting more than a third for those guys. But at the same time, we've seen what Rand Carthen over the last 2 years has been able to do with those day 3 picks, which is find guys who can make an impact rather quickly with guys like Jarvis Brownlee Jr., talk about Tyjae Spears, things like that. These guys towards the end of the draft, Jalen Harrell even making some plays on Sunday, which is I feel like the first time we really saw him step up this season. So those guys are kind of making plays early on into their careers here. Outside of that, I really don't see a world where Calvin Ridley, with how bad he's playing right now, ever gets moved, especially with that contract.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I agree with you on Amani Hooker with that. But outside of that, I think, you realistically probably see 2 or 3 guys moved at the deadline here.
Yeah. The thing is, more good news, people. I don't think this draft class is actually very good. So I'm struggling. I'm struggling to find, I don't have any like blue chip players in my class right now because
I don't think that's what the people wanted to hear, Stoney, when they said talk draft. I don't know if that's what they want to hear.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's what you have to do though, right? Like you have to get the picks, you have to do your scouting, you have to evaluate, and you have to take a swing on guys. I mean, what's the alternative? You don't, and you don't go anywhere. But I would especially be considering getting more draft picks because you increase your odds of hitting with more picks, if that makes sense. Like you can afford a slip up if you've got an extra fourth or an extra fifth or something like that. And I think this is a draft that you're probably, oh boy, I'm trying to be optimistic and not just scorched earth on this class, but I think there are gems to be found like in every class, but I think it's going to be a situation where they're going to need, it might not just be next player acquisition cycle. I'll just say that. I don't want to tell the people to tune out for the next 2 years, but
one more,
we could be in trouble here.
All right, maybe we won't do that much draft. I do want to bring up one thing quick here, which is a conversation that is going on in the comments section here, and I think it's an interesting question. As Shrike brings up, you look to see, a popular phrase with Vrabel last year was you look to see when a guy does less with more, and for better, for worse, it feels like Callahan is doing less with more than what Vrabel had. And I would push back on that notion with kind of the biggest thought being that when you look at what Vrabel was doing last year with some of this, maybe he's doing more with less. You talk about two different philosophies in terms of coaching. One being Vrabel's defensive mindness, his defensive mind really playing a big part into their success and being able to kind of dominate these teams. Whereas it is totally switched to the other side here in terms of what the Titans have been able to do. You kind of give all that defensive responsibility to a guy like Wilson, something that the head coach is not really involved with. He's involved, but at the end of the day, he's not the one really scheming up this defense, so to say. And then when you look at what he's doing, he's trying to do more with, you look at this offense that continues to have a gaping hole at the right side, a quarterback who turns out is not really has the upside that you once thought he might have, and you're dealing with aging wide receivers who are not living up to the potential that they paid them. And so when you talk about Brian Callahan doing less with the more that he has, I don't know exactly how much more he can be doing when the guys that they have right now simply aren't executing at all.
Yeah, and player execution was an issue under Mike Vrabel as well. I mean, Shane Bowen and them were in press conferences talking about the players just need to execute better. Like, this isn't an excuse that is solely and exclusively for Brian Callahan. I would also say last year was year 6 of the Vrabel experience. Sure. We're on game 6 of the Brian Callahan experience. Sure. I mean, it's just, I think people overestimate the leader of men quality for Mike Vrabel, because in hindsight, what we saw was that the way he coached, yes, he got people fired up for a game and they were really good as underdogs for a couple seasons, but man, it really was not sustainable. And we saw it bottom out in 2022 and continue in 2023. And I just don't think that Mike Vrabel was the more with less coach that people thought that he was. I thought he lost the locker room pretty early on in 2023. And that was reported too, by the way. I'm not just blowing smoke out of my ass. It was Teron Davenport, if I'm not mistaken, that put out the quote that said many in the locker room felt like now I'm trying to say quotes from memory that I don't have in front of me, but they
felt like they could be more themselves this year.
So
around there.
So I think we kind of, I'm not trying to be critical of anybody, because I was guilty of it too. Up until the end of last season, when I said that I thought Mike Vrabel would get a chance to right the ship. there were more issues going on with his firing than just performance on the field. And that's been reported as well. That's come out. Issues with the relationship with ownership, the communication, the collaboration, that sort of stuff. But I think when once you just rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak, then I think you look back and you start to see, I don't really think this guy was the expert motivator that could just turn a switch and have everybody playing super hard that everybody thought that he was. It's easy to do that when you're winning games. And Jeffrey Simmons said as much last season, like, coach better, play better. Eventually we have to start doing it. We can't just start saying it. Like, that stuff gets old when you're not winning. And why was he not winning, JT? Because the roster got worse. 2019 to 2021, pretty good Titans roster in hindsight. I don't think we appreciated how good those rosters truly were. And when they got worse because of John Robinson's 3 consecutive shitty draft classes that were just, awful, I think it caught up with them. And we saw a sort of regression to the mean with Mike Vrabel. So I get it. They're golden years in Titans history. I'll always treasure the memories, that AFC championship run, the #1 seed, the 2,000-yard season for Derrick Henry. But I don't think that to reverse the role, so to speak, I don't know that Mike Vrabel has won one game with this current Titans team in 2024.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it here. That's going to do it for the Hot Read podcast today. Thank you once again to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring the show. Make sure to head on over and follow them on socials at Sinkers Bev on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and wherever you find your social media. And remember to join the in crowd for special benefits and whatnot. For Stoney, Keeley, I am JT Ruhnke. We'll be back on Friday with whatever this Titans game is going to be this Sunday. We'll preview that, talk more about this discussion and a lot more on Friday. Until then, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you later.
Go watch Ricky White out of UNLV, the wide receiver.
There you go. All right.